Retroreality TV presents Reimagine That with Chris Mann, offering refreshing reality with a retro twist. This week we present part 2 of Chris's interview with television writer and producer Kenneth Johnson, and we'll delve once more into the dream world with our very own dream weaver, Yvonne Riva. And now, introducing your host, Chris Mann.
Thank you, Linda Kay, our vintage-voiced announcer and producer. And hi again, everybody. Welcome to episode 10 of Reimagine That, the Retrorealty.tv podcast, where retro pop meets forward thought. It's April 4th, 2012, and we have for you today part 2 of our extensive, exclusive interview with TV creator, director, writer, producer Kenneth Johnson, who created the Bionic Woman, who adapted The Incredible Hulk for TV, who created V and adapted Alien Nation, also in the late 80s and 90s in a series of movies. In this part, Kenny talks about his plans for a big screen, big budget V feature. This on the heels of the canceled ABC reimagination of V, which Kenny was not involved in creatively. Kenny brings up a very good point, and really Kenny works in thematic storytelling, so it's only appropriate that I sort of borrow from him, as so many have done in pop culture, and say that our theme today is reinvigorating your vision. Kenny talks about wanting to reinvigorate the original V with this feature that will allow him to really tell the story with the modern tools, the money, the budget of a feature film that he wasn't able to 30 years ago. And he said it's not a reimagining of V, but it's a reinvigorating of the original. Reinvigorating your original vision. Reimagining is not a term that is looked upon kindly by original visionaries like Kenneth Johnson and really the audience who grew up with their original visions when that term reimagining is applied to the using of a title or a franchise to set up a new series or movie that really doesn't capture the essence of the original. So reimagining, in my opinion, has been misappropriated. I'm trying to get that word back to apply it to our lives, our daily lives. And reimagining and reinvigorating are both really terms that I think apply to our lives, especially those of us over 30, or in my case, someone who's about 3 weeks away from turning 40. Reimagining your life and then reinvigorating yourself by expressing that reimagination. I think that that's what life is all about as you go from one decade to the next. And those of us who grew up with and were touched by and embraced a pop culture, particularly TV, of the late 20th century, we're all hitting that midway mark in life, or possibly 1/3 of the way mark, if current bionics and nanotechnology and all of that good stuff prove to be successful and we all live well beyond Betty White's age. I don't think many of us can pull off 90 or 80 or 70 the way Betty White has, but it's something to aspire to. And Kenny has inspired me to think about this whole reinvigoration. And this podcast has reinvigorated me, and soon we will be incorporating an element of the show that's sort of the real people aspect. Speaking of a show from the late 70s, early 80s, a sort of Reality Reimagined segment where our listeners, and we're going to start with some people that I know through the wonderful world of Facebook, meeting these people and reconnecting with people from my childhood that have amazing stories as they reach that 40 mark or above. And I thought, why not share a little bit of my own story about my reimagination and reinvigoration in the last 5, 6, 7 years, to sort of get this party started. I really began to reimagine, re-envision my life and my career. The thought of making a change for myself was empowering, and I believe that thought creates reality. So these thoughts were really forming and taking on a life of their own, certainly by age 32, 33. At that point, I had lived in LA for about 10 years. I grew up really wanting to be a storyteller, whether that was telling funny stories or telling dramatic stories, whatever it was, and it's taken different forms in different periods of my life. But that was my niche. That was my thing. But I didn't want to be a news reporter. I didn't want to do death and destruction and all of that stuff. I wanted to do creative, constructive, inspiring, entertaining, exciting stuff that can be transformative. I wanted to tell those stories. So my background in journalism and communications served me tremendously well in writing my first book about Three's Company, Come and Knock on Our Door. But my senior year of college, I was like, wait a minute, I really need to sort of get a second degree here. So I stayed a fifth year in college and got a certificate actually in visual communication, graphic design. And for the next 10 years or so in LA, I was a gainfully employed art director, a magazine art director. And it was quite fulfilling. And it enabled me to have some stability while I pursued my book and some other creative projects. But over time, that part of me that really wants to be the storyteller wasn't quite getting expressed in the art direction only. You know, I can understand Kenny wanting to be the director of his stories. To art direct a magazine story was exciting and fulfilling, and I felt like I was part of that process, which really included the role of producer of the shoot as well. I was budgeting the shoots, casting the shoots, picking the costumes, the outfits, the set design, all of that for the shoots under the title of art direction, but it was really producing and art directing. But I wanted to be the writer too. So around age 32, 33, things started to really go awry in life. Not that things were ever not awry frequently, but things really got awry around that period of time. John Ritter, who really was my childhood hero and inspiration, as we all know, suddenly passed in September of 2003. About a year before that, my grandfatherly mentor, my Obi-Wan Kenobi, my great-uncle Kenneth Johnson, he also passed away. And I had used to spend my summers with my Uncle Ken and Aunt Marie, and they lived across the street from Bob Barker and Hollywood. And I got that creative excitement and invigoration as a kid and as a teenager, and, you know, in my early 20s when I was still finishing up my studies at the University of Tulsa. So my uncle was really my lifeline in that regard, and John was a lifeline and really an inspiration. And when both of them passed, it was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? What am I doing here as an art director, sort of spinning my wheels? I felt I had just gone through a protracted drama with this NBC behind-the-scenes movie on Three's Company. Oh, the irony. That's a whole other story, and I've long moved on from it, but it was very challenging, and there were detours and delays and disillusioning moments. And then when I lost these two people that really were shining these lights for me to keep pressing forward in the crazy jungle of LA and Hollywood, I kind of thought, you know what? It's time to put the brakes on this and reimagine my life. And that, quite frankly, was not easy for me to do. It was not easy for me to leave my day job. In 2001 and 2002, I moved my mom and then my sister and her 3 children, who were like my children. I moved them to LA, and we're living in Venice on the beach, and there was all of that wonderment and excitement. But at the same time, I was responsible for like 6 people and going through these sort of crushing experiences in Hollywood started with this Three's Company movie, wherein I became the person who was shut out, much like Chrissy in season 5 of Three's Company, although I didn't do anything, I felt, to pave my way to that. But in retrospect, it was all destiny, because it prompted me to go, you know what? I'm moving out of LA. I'm going to take a breather, and I'm moving my family with me. At that point, it was 5 of us. And we did. And we moved up to northern Santa Barbara County. And I really felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. I left that career that I started, and I worked so hard to get to that point of being a senior art director of a national monthly magazine. And I had art directed Eva Longoria, during her first season of Desperate Housewives for the cover of Let's Live magazine. So in a way, I had reached my maximum expression in that aspect of my life as an art director, but the hunger inside me to be the storyteller and to get out of the insanity so that I could clear my head, re-envision my life, and recharge my batteries, reinvigorate myself, and reinvigorate my original vision. Find that again, get in touch with it, and live it. That has given me so much energy over the last few years. As I go from my mid-30s to my late 30s and beyond, I really feel energized. And now, 7 years later, I have a screenplay under my belt that I'm getting ready to take to market that I am really excited about. I can't say much about it now. I also have a couple of books that I'm in the process of putting back on the front burner, including my long-in-the-works book about John Ritter that I hope to have out late next year in connection with the, 10th anniversary of his passing. It's so hard to believe. He is still such a present force, a present inspiration in my life. And he's inspired me. And Kenny has inspired me. And all of these fun celebrities who are reaching this point in their life where they are reimagining and reinventing themselves that we've talked to here on Reimagine That. Bronson Pinchot, Alison Arngrim, Joyce DeWitt, to name a few. They are all sort of lending to the energy of reinvigoration that I hope you also are taking from this show. And I hope that there is a thread from my story that you relate to. And I know there will be in the stories of the Realilty Reimagined folks that we have planned for this spring and summer. Whether you're 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, hello, Betty White. We are all on the journey of rediscovering ourselves and really reclaiming our vision. And I am so excited to have reclaimed mine and for this new podcast to be part of the expression, the reinvigoration of that process. So with that said, I am so excited to present part 2 of our interview with legendary, iconic series creator, director, producer, writer. He has done it all, Kenneth Johnson. Check out his website, by the way, at kennethjohnson.us. He gives regular updates about the progress of his proposed V feature, as well as his work as a professor, as a lecturer. He's written books. He has done it all. So check out his website. It is a great resource for all of his shows, for all of his projects, past, present, and future. Now let's join Kenny as he talks about some life and career changing advice he got from somebody who gave him a big break, the executive producer of The $6 Million Man, Harve Bennett, as Kenny takes us from his Bionic days through his Alien Nation days and beyond with V, The Next Generation, his novel, as well as his proposed V feature or trilogy thereof, the first of which will hopefully be coming to a theater near you in the not too distant future.
One of the things Harve told me early on, Chris, was that doing episodic television was the greatest training in the world for making movies or for waging war. And And it's true, and I've learned that over the years. I looked at my years at Universal like sort of graduate school or doctorate school with pay.
Yeah.
Because that's what it was like. And I learned so much and had so many great relationships that I developed there that have lasted for 30 years. Many crew people I've worked with for that long, and we're absolutely locked together, the Velcroed at the hip, Susie would say, like family. And they went on to work on V with me and on many other things that I've done since then. And when I left Universal and I looked around, and Warner's and I made a good deal. They were very, very willing to try to help me get into features, as long as I did some TV for them too. So it was a good quid pro quo. But almost immediately I had an idea that I had been percolating on, which was about this sort of fascist takeover of the United States where we were suddenly living in a different country. And I mentioned it to Brandon Tartikoff one night, who was head of NBC at the time. We were having dinner, and I mentioned this feature script that I was writing about this thing, and he said, let me read it. And I said, no, Brandon, this is not television. This is a feature, And he said, Kenny, let me read it. And he read it, and he loved it, and suddenly he said, why don't we do it as a big miniseries, and then it could go on and become a series. And I said, I don't want a series. I want to make long form and movies and stuff. Series are hard. So I wrote the script for V very, very quickly, and Brandon, loved it, and we went forward. And it's funny, Chris. We talk about all the trappings of science fiction and all of that sort of stuff. Probably the best day I ever had in my career was when I saw my first rough cut of V, and it was just me and the editors in little screening room 2 over at Warner Brothers, and there were no visual effects in it. There were no spaceships flying or motion control or matte paintings or lasers or any of that. We hadn't had time to do any of that stuff. It was just the actors performing.
The human drama.
Oh, my God. And it took your head off. The performances were so good and so consistently good across the board. We had just managed to get the best performances out of every single person. And I knew that all the visual stuff was just going to be, icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And I called Brandon and I said, I think you're going to be really happy. and indeed, I said, there's only one problem. It's not 4 hours. It's 4 hours and 15 minutes. And he said, well, we'll look at it. We'll find some ways to trim it down. I said, Brandon, let me tell you something. This is not Kenny protecting his golden words, because I learned a long time ago that you have to kill your babies in the editing room. I said, I don't know what we would cut that wouldn't hurt the picture. You really got to look at it and give me some fresh eyes and tell me what you think. So he came over the next day and he looked at it and he came out of the screening room sort of with his head bowed and pulling his lip, and I'm going, oh shit, And Brandon said, I got to go to the affiliates and get 15 more minutes. He said, we can't cut this.
Oh, great.
I said, can you do that? He said, I don't know. It's never been done. Let me try. But that's what he did. And the first night of V ran from 9 until 11:15. It was unprecedented. And boy, that's the kind of guy that you want with you. But
yeah, he was a visionary.
Something, I think, as you know, Chris, I own the motion picture rights to that original V.
I wanted to ask you about that process.
Yeah, and when the word got out around town that I own the motion picture rights, I suddenly had a lot of new best friends, at all,
Let's do lunch.
All of the studios, literally every one of the major studios.
Wow.
I had meetings with all of the upper echelon, and they all wanted to buy the rights from me to let me produce it, maybe let me write it, but they weren't sure because they saw it as a $200 million tentpole epic or something that they wanted to bring. They thought maybe they should bring in a director that had done a couple of $200 million movies, and I said, gee, no. I've seen what's happened when people tried to take on the Bionic Woman. I've seen what's happened when they tried to redo The Incredible Hulk. I've also had seen what had happened when they tried to redo V back in the 80s.
Mid-80s,
Yeah. And I said, no, guys, I said no. And of course, when you say no to the studios, they think it's because you want more money.
Right. No, this isn't about that.
I swear to God, Chris. And they'd say, no, we'll bring a dump truck full of money. I said, no, you don't understand. It's not about the money, guys. And I decided at that point that I didn't want to lose quality control on the project. So I decided that I wanted to make the picture as an independent picture. I knew that I did not need $200 million to make it because so much of that money goes to the studio overhead and everything else.
Right.
And so what we were endeavoring to do is set up V, the movie as an independent picture with a budget a little under about $55 million, and I can make a really slam dunk movie with a couple of names in it as well, although it still will retain the essence of what I did originally, because as opposed to reimagining it, I always, that's a scary word, you know.
Right, that's such a misappropriated word, you know. There's very little imagining happening when somebody is taking a world already created by someone like you and just then trying to shoehorn it into alleged current tastes.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of imagining in many of those instances.
No, or if it is, it's misimagined, and because they miss the essence, as happened on the Bionic Woman, as happened in the Hulk movies, as happened on V, and each time they have failed, and I don't misunderstand, it's not because I wasn't involved, because I could have failed too, but I wouldn't have done it the way that they did it. I know that for sure.
Right.
And what I'm endeavoring to do in V, the movie, is to absolutely retain the essence of what people love. You know, all of my original characters are still most all of them are still involved. The storylines are still the same storylines. Of course, they have been moved up and brought into the 21st century. I mean, when I did the original one, there were no cell phones and there was no internet. And there was all of those things. There were no terrorists, or so if there were, they weren't the kind that we know now.
Yeah.
And so I know those were issues that needed to be dealt with, but I want the audience for V, the movie, when they come to see it, not to sit down in their seats and have the movie start and have them go, wait a minute, this isn't what I remember.
That's right.
This doesn't have the same feeling. This isn't V, this is X or something else, you know? And so what I've endeavored to do is mine and reinvigorate much of the original. There's a lot of even of the original dialogue has remained the same because it was a timeless story, you know?
Yes.
And I think that, to go back to what you had said earlier about sort of the timelessness of the things that I have been lucky enough to have successful, V is probably the most important of those because, you know, V is a story thematically that goes back to Spartacus and the revolt of the slaves or the American Revolution or apartheid or any of those stories where a people has been oppressed by a more powerful totalitarian regime.
Power. And, there you go.
Yeah, power. It's about power.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not about occupation necessarily. It's not about lizards.
No. That's the beauty of it. You put your finger exactly on the right word because V was never about big spaceships and reptilian people. V was about power. That's what my original concept was when I saw it as a fascist takeover here of grassroots, real people on Earth. And it's like how everyday people like you and me respond to totalitarian power like that.
Yeah.
Some of us will suck up to them like the Vichy French did in World War II. Others will try to keep their head down saying, well, if I don't bother them, they won't bother me. And other people still, who become the heroes of the piece, say, wait a minute, no, this power is being abused. We have to fight back against it with our hearts and souls and bodies.
Yes.
And they become the heroes of the resistance. And that story is a timeless story. And
it is.
For all of the success that V enjoyed when I originally did it, and it was phenomenally successful, both here and overseas.
I remember.
Oh, yeah. It was the highest-rated show NBC had in 2.5 years. We had an audience of 80 million people, a 40 share in North America alone.
Wow.
The following year, it went up against the Olympics around the world when they released it internationally, and we beat the Olympics 2-1 around the world.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, it's humongous. And if you Google V or V Visitors or something like that on Google, you get 83 pages of links to organizations, people, fan groups, Facebook pages, all of this stuff, and it continues to go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And also the critics just went crazy for it. I mean, from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to the Christian Science Monitor compared it favorably to Orwell. I mean, it was like, holy cow. You know, it was the best of both worlds. And yet, the only person who was not happy with it was me.
Really?
Yeah, because I had not had the time or the budget or, more importantly, the tools to make it look the way that I saw it in my head and that I wanted to see it. Emotionally, yes. The performances I could not have improved upon. They were solid and perfect. The surroundings and the visual stuff that I wanted to do, the tools just didn't exist. There were a few shots in V of the spaceships flying and stuff that cost maybe $75,000 or $80,000 was for 20 seconds of film that you could do on your cell phone today. I'm not kidding.
That puts it in perspective.
And it would look better than what I did then. And the frustration for me was that I knew that, but there was no way to do it.
Nothing you could do.
The reptilian faces, of course, were prosthetic latex masks, the same that Spielberg and Lucas were using. We were all working at the state of the art, but it was still latex and blowing bubbles,
For 30 years ago.
That's right. And now, of course, you can do Voldemort or, or all kinds of remarkable things, and much more inexpensively than we did back then. So the real excitement for me about doing V the movie is to not only revisit it and bring it up into the 21st century, but revisit the characters and the storylines that the audience loved back then and that touched so many people, and also enhance it with the visual tools that are now available to me so that I can really, really take everybody's head off on the big screen in
literally.
a way that, yeah, literally. And we'll probably do it in 3D as well, because I'm a big believer that if it's done well, and I thought Jim Cameron did it very, very well in Avatar, and I think what Martin Scorsese did on Hugo also shows that it doesn't have to be the tail that is wagging the dog.
Right.
It just becomes a part of the texture of the whole piece.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of V also, of course, is that I have this sequel called V the Second Generation that picks the story up 20 years later. So the first movie will really be the first of a trilogy of films that will allow me to keep exploring the human condition and the human emotions and the byplay of character and relationships, over 3 movies. So
I love it.
We keep sneaking right up to getting the financing, and we seem to be again in the home stretch at this point, and I'm hopeful that in a month or so I can call you and say, Chris,
fingers crossed.
Money's in the bank,
Do you think prospective investors are able to separate your V and its ardent global following from the failure of ABC's Reimagined V?
Actually, yeah, it's interesting because to us, the Reimagined recent series on ABC really proved to us that there's an audience out there because of the tune-in that they got that first night, which was, again, it was almost exactly parallel to the Bionic Woman. When V went on the air the first night, there was a huge rush to see it. It had been tracking very high in expectation, and it did, 15 million people, which is not like the 80 million that we did all those years ago. But nowadays, that's a very respectable start for a show.
Right.
But the second week, it plummeted and went downhill, and it's because of what happened with the Bionic Woman. People tuned in, wanted to see V, and they got there and went, wait a minute, these aren't the characters or the story, or this isn't, and why are they calling the visitors the Vs? That's not what the letter V is about.
Right.
Hello? So the people who have that we've been talking to in terms of financing and stuff absolutely get the fact that there is a huge international audience out there for it.
Great.
My novel was just translated into Korean.
Oh my gosh.
There's an Italian version that's coming out too in a couple of weeks, but it's been in several other languages. So it's like Korean? What's that? It just shows the international scope of
V, the Next Generation.
Yeah.
Your novel
exactly.
from 2008, right?
Right, exactly. So all of the people that we have been talking to absolutely get the fact that it is a major brand name that has not been handled well on television, but here's an opportunity to do it in a way that, and I think audiences are wise enough and savvy enough nowadays, Chris, to know that when they see a poster that says, from the original writer-director, the original classic is reborn, they'll go, this is not some yo-yo that's coming in and trying to trade off of the fact that I loved V all those years ago. This is the real deal from the real guy,
Yeah.
And so, listen, we can really speed the process if you'll just write me a check for, $40 or $50 million, Chris, and,
I'm going to work on that.
Yeah, or, give me your credit card. I'll take anything.
We'll get you at least $40 or $50 there.
That's right, and you get a nice executive producer credit, and you get to come and sit on the set and, and mingle with the folks, and, it's going to be a fun movie when we get it going, and hopefully it'll be soon.
Well, fingers crossed, and do please keep me updated. I'd love to share with our listeners, because they've been waiting, this is a big, ambitious project, and it's a process to get to the realization.
Well, that's true, and as I said, I could have sold it off a year and a half ago to any of the majors that I chose for just a gazillion dollars, but I came to the conclusion, Chris, that I would rather that the movie never got made than got made by the wrong people.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, and that's what I had. It was a tough decision to make, and financially and otherwise, but I just couldn't see it get screwed up because most of the other things that I've done have been very successful in one way or another were an adaptation of something that pre-existed, whether it was Alien Nation or the Bionic Woman coming out of the Bionic Man series or the Incredible Hulk coming from a comic book. They were, one way or another, they were kind of adaptations.
Yes.
V, on the other hand, sprang entirely out of my little pea brain, and for that reason, I am very, very, very protective of it, and I want to continue to do that, even if it means not ever letting it get made, as opposed to getting made wrong.
Very well said. And because you were the guy that created it, and because you are still very much in touch with the audience that grew up with the original and whose imaginations were in part shaped by the world of the original, hey, maybe this version is going to fly versus that ABC thing or the NBC second miniseries they did that you really weren't involved in.
That's right. No, I supervised the writing of it, but I left before it was produced because Warner didn't want to let me direct the sequel because they felt, this is a quote, that I wouldn't do it as quick and cheap and dirty as they wanted it done.
Oh, my
They just wanted to get it over with.
Like
so
it's
that
a porno.
That's right, exactly. They just wanted to just get it out of the way and get it done so that we could get on to this. In order to get Warner Brothers to agree to do the 6-hour sequel, NBC had to give Warner's a 12-hour on-the-air blind series commitment for an entirely different project that I was to create. It had nothing to do with V, a separate show entirely. And when Warner's got that deal, they said, okay, we'll do the miniseries, but we really don't want to go do it well. We don't really care what it looks like. We just want to get it on and out of the way so we can get on to the series.
Wow.
Something else,
Yeah.
And I said, no, guys, it wasn't going to happen that way.
Well, I've often wondered, how do you, as a creator, director, writer, producer, how do you reconcile being a forward-thinking individual, which you've demonstrated since The Bionic Woman, and an artist? How do you reconcile that with working in Hollywood, especially these days? I mean, if it was that way 25, 30 years ago with this V sequel, and look how it is now, it's such a factory, Hollywood.
I know. Because of vertical integration of corporate structures, the guys like Brandon Tartikoff just don't really exist very much anymore. The guys who can say, no, I don't care if it is a black and white movie with no sound. I want to make it anyway. I mean, God bless Harvey Weinstein for jumping in and making that great movie, The Artist. And there are a few people out there that have that sort of old artistic spirit that transcends the bean counting that goes on.
Yes.
And it's very frustrating, but listen, I'm not alone in this. I mean, there are legions of writer, producer, directors with far greater pedigree and credits and stuff than mine who have always faced that same challenge of trying to get the things made that we really cared about. I mean, how often do you hear them at the Academy Awards saying, God, it took us 10 years to get this movie made, but and those always seem to be the ones that rise to the top.
That stay the course.
Exactly. They're not just a cookie cutter, and I'm determined that V, the movie, will be seen as me trying to absolutely take the original and make it better, but not lose what made it wonderful to begin with.
That's right. The essence, as you said. With the Bionic Woman malfunctioning and the reimagined V crashing, and then we've seen Charlie's Angels, pilots for Wonder Woman and the Rockford Files that never came to fruition. Do you think Hollywood's starting to get the message about these reimaginings, these remakes?
Well, I don't know. I think a lot of the reason all of the reimaginings happen is because everyone is running scared, mostly because so many of the people that are running the studios and the networks have come out of marketing as opposed to, working their way up as fellow producers. I mean, Frank Price, who was running Universal when I was there, had been a producer for a long time and was an artist and knew what he was doing. And I think nowadays it's easier to say, well, it worked before, it worked back then, and it's a big title, so people will tune in because it's a big title. And again, occasionally they'll make one. I mean, Hawaii Five-0 seems to be hanging on, even though it's very different from the original show.
Really, the one network exception that is hanging on in terms of a remake.
I think so. Unfortunately, so many people feel like if we have a big name title, that's all we really need. And we can do whatever we want, and people will. And you'd think after a while they'd begin to see, with one failure after another, that no, it's not about the title. title, guys. It's about how you treat the title and what you do with it. And in the case of David Icke and Battlestar Galactica, it worked like a charm. In the case of David and the Bionic Woman, it didn't work.
That's right.
So it's a very dicey road to cover. But when you're a production executive, any way you can cover your ass is the way to go. And if you've got something that worked once, you can say, well, yeah, but it worked before. Or, if we get some big director to direct it, then it'll work too. But, Steven Spielberg's credit on Smash isn't helping it to succeed.
That's right. You can have the name and you can have the outer shell, but if there's nothing on the inside, the audience is going to figure that out pretty fast.
That's exactly right. And so what I'm endeavoring to do is, particularly with this movie, is to not only satisfy the expectations of the fans, but exceed their expectations and simultaneously draw in a new generation of people who may not have known anything about it at all before, except their parents said, wow, I really loved that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, and among the emails that I get, the thousands of them that come in, probably half of them say something like, I was 10 or 12 or 15 when V originally aired, and now I'm late 20s, early 30s, and I'm looking at it again and going, oh, wait a minute, there was a lot more going on here than I realized.
That's right. Layers.
That's right.
And I was probably 12 when your miniseries premiered, and I've often wondered, Kenny, why doesn't Hollywood, when reimagining or doing a new take on an iconic series, why don't they seem to have a healthy and really appropriate respect for the 35-plus demo who grew up with this and whose lives were shaped by the imagination that was projected the first time around? Why isn't there, if you're going to reimagine, why aren't you thinking about that?
Or why aren't they going back sometimes to the original guys who did it?
Hello.
Do we think that Steve Cannell lost any of his chops as he got older? Do we think Stephen Bochco is no longer as creative as he used to be?
Right.
If given the chance. Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of TV and movie executives are 35 or maybe 40 at the outside themselves.
Yeah.
And there's a little intimidation factor when suddenly a guy walks into the room that is 15 or 20 years older than they are. And there's an ageism. There's no question about it, in Hollywood that goes on.
There is.
And also, I think a lot of the guys who are executives at studios want to feel like they're the smartest person in the room.
Right. So let's hire a bunch of 25-year-old writers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it pays off in spades, and other times it doesn't.
Other times, not so much.
Right.
Well, your work, again, has stood the test of time, and we can't wait to see your V feature. I'm so excited about that. Do you think maybe 2013 we might see this?
That would be ideal, and that's certainly what we're aiming for now. As I said, we seem to be in the home stretch with getting the funding together, but but our phone lines are open.
There you go. We're taking calls.
It's true, and it's an exciting prospect for all of us that are involved in it, because fortunately everyone who has read the script that I have written have said wow, and particularly when they realize that there are at least 2 more movies that could be made out of my second generation sequels, and that really carry the story forward with new characters and all kinds of stuff that really, again, continues the thematic stuff that I started with at the beginning and brings it to the appropriate fruition. It's a very exciting concept to be right on the edge of. And when it happens, Chris, by God, you'll be on the set there with us at some point.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
We'll slip you in for a cameo.
Sounds like a deal. I just had a couple more questions for you, Kenny.
Oh, before I forget, I also meant to tell you that Susie thought your work with Angelina's leg was really, really fascinating.
Thank you.
Cracked us up, boy. I'll tell you.
The leg that
well, it was interesting because when she did it, it was so definitely done.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, there was no. This didn't just happen casually. I am now going to stand like this. And bless her heart, I don't know, whatever press she can get, I think it's great. I think they're a great couple and they do wonderful things with the world.
There you go. So it couldn't happen to a more worthy
leg.
Maybe it's a bionic leg. There might be a future project there. You know, the Bionic Woman, going back to what you had said about the diverse following of the Bionic Woman, the gay and lesbian community, women being such a big following for that show. Then they tried to remake it a few years ago, didn't take off. Charlie's Angels was reimagined, didn't take off. We didn't even get to see David E. Kelly's Wonder Woman. Do you have a feeling about trying to reimagine these women-led shows that existed and grew out of the initial sort of contemporary feminist movement in the 70s, and planting them in the 2000s, 2012, and trying to make them relevant or fit today's taste? Do you think there's an inherent struggle there in duplicating that in that era where people like you were really forging new territory with these
strong female characters?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's funny. My mother and father were divorced when I was about 4, and she remarried, and I was raised by my mother and stepfather primarily, and then I'd see my real father for summers in Arkansas. But my mother was a very strong woman, and she was also a terrible flirt and all of that as well, but she was a career woman, and, you know, she was not at home cooking and cleaning all day. She was out working, and I was an only child, and so I always had an example in my life, in my house, in my everyday life of a woman who was equal to anything, and certainly equal to any of the men that she had to work with. And I think I was probably a feminist before there was a word for it.
Really?
Yeah, because it was just inherent in how I looked at women. I always looked at them as equal, or in many cases better than guys were, and smarter, and it's an interesting but true feeling that I always had.
Yes.
And so I was always interested in creating female characters that were not the girlfriend or the wife or, the girl in the movie.
The appendage.
Yeah, but rather the principal. And
right.
I mean, you really see it big time in V, where the character of Julie, the young intern, who classifies herself as a conservative, probably as a Republican, and and all of that, but suddenly she finds herself as the leader of the resistance because she's the natural. She's the natural leader. It's inherent in her, and she doesn't even know it. And counterbalancing that is the dragon lady on the other side, the character of Diana, who is in my head, a combination of Goebbels and Mingala, and yet at the same time, as we discover more and more in the second generation, has different kinds of flaws and vulnerabilities that we didn't know about before. But to me, I just have always loved writing female characters, and the stronger, the better. And nowadays, it's sort of depressing, I think, sometimes to see the Desperate Housewives shows, this new Good Christian Bitches that's about to start up, the revenge, the soap stuff, where there are certainly a lot of strong, dominant female roles, but they're not necessarily the ones that you really want to pattern yourself after.
No. The balance is missing.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's it. You said the right word.
Yeah. Jamie Summers had a definite sort of nurturing quality to her, and yet you can still be strong. You can still have that sort of masculine energy too, but I think you balanced the masculine and the feminine quite well.
Well, that's exactly what we wanted to do. I mean, the fact that she was a woman was secondary to the fact that she was Jamie.
Right, right.
And I think that that's what people have felt. I also enjoyed in doing Alien Nation, creating female characters there that were also, quite strong, independent, both Michelle Scarabelli's character of the wife in the show and Terry Tree's brilliant, sexy portrayal of the alien girl across the hall, was terrific. And Alien Nation was probably the show I had the most fun on because we never stopped laughing. We started in 1989 and didn't finish the last TV movie, I think, until 97.
Yep.
And on the DVD, as a matter of fact, I did a gathering in my living room of all of the actors together, just reminiscing. And if you look at that, it's about a half hour long and on the DVD, and you can see the spirit that was moving among these people. And the other thing that was great about Alien Nation was the fact that all the minorities felt that it was about them, the gay and lesbian community among them, as well as the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Asian American community.
That's the universality of that fame.
Right.
Yeah,
that was exactly it. Because when Fox first asked me to look at the movie, they thought they had Lethal Weapon with aliens, and I sure, call the alien guy, and I said no. But then there was one scene where in the movie where I was screening it, where a character of the alien cop, played in the movie by Mandy Patinkin, waved goodbye to his wife and 2 kids. You only saw them for one shot in the movie, Chris. Chris. They were on the porch waving. Little
Yeah.
alien woman and two little alien kids. And the bell went off in my head, and I said, whoa, wait a minute. Who are they? What's
Yes.
it like to be them? What's it like to be the latest one off the bus? The lowest rung on the hierarchy. And I went back to Fox and said, do you think you got Lethal Weapon? Yeah. I said, no. What you've got is In the Heat of the Night. I said, let me do a piece that is about intolerance and prejudice and social, cultural clash. And that's a show that can go on and on and on and be much more than just a police procedural.
Absolutely.
Fox never quite got it, but they finally just got out of the way and let me do it. And,
Trust me.
That's right. And in that case, they did. And again, the female characters in that show were absolutely on an equal footing with men. And it's just the way I've always thought. And I'd love to see more good female role models appear on television. And,
wouldn't that be nice?
Yes, it would. I think the world needs that.
Well, and maybe this is a nice way to sort of tie this up, because the theme of alienation and being alien in your world is really a theme that goes back to the Bionic Woman with your series,
right.
and certainly David Banner. And I think that is at the essence, for me, what resonated with those characters, and then on up, literally, the alien concept with V and alienation. But to feel like an outsider and to see these relatable characters in a fantasy context or a sci-fi context, but you've carried through that humanness, and I totally get why all of your series have a following to this day. I really do, and I have to applaud you.
That's very kind, Chris. And I think that, if I had one legacy that I would hope would be left behind, it would be a sense that my work all had a feeling of humanism about it. And I've turned down more work over the years than I ever could have had. I've turned down more movies and TV shows than I ever could have made because I didn't connect with them in my heart.
Yes.
And I knew that if I did this particular thing, I really couldn't look at myself in the mirror because it just didn't express the kind of humanistic values that I treasure and that I've always tried my best to not only live up to, but to present for the audience. And not in a Pollyanna kind of way, but in a sense of real human values.
And you've nailed it, I have to say. And I can't wait again to see V, your vision on the big screen. V is for vision, really, if you want to get down to it.
Oh, fun. I like that.
There you go. And one last little loose end. You and Lindsay Wagner have since come back and seen each other and reconciled? I mean, I know that there was a sort of a parting of ways.
After the show, I left the show back in 78, I guess it was, 77. We didn't see each other for 3 or 4 years, and then I ran into her one day over at MGM while I was prepping one of my mini features that didn't get made. And we were just in passing. She was coming down a flight of stairs, and I was going up, and we ran into each other, and she sort of stopped, and she said, "I was kind of a jerk, huh?" And
Cool.
I said, yeah, you were. And she said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "No problem. I get it. I understand. And times have changed, and I'm glad you're in a different place now." And she indeed was by then. And then in 2006, there was a Bionic Woman convention in Florida that I was invited to. It was the first time she had ever done a convention. And they were eager to have me come. And I said, "Well, I'm okay with it. You might want to check with Lindsay and just make sure she's cool." And indeed she was. And
Good.
I arrived first, and we were in the middle of some photo op somewhere. And she walked into the room, and she saw me and absolutely burst into tears.
Wow.
And came over and gave me this huge hug. And after the couple of days of convention were over and everything had quieted down, she and I just had a long dinner one evening. And
Nice.
We held hands across the table for 2 hours and
Wow.
laughed and cried and talked. And so we're in a good place together. She got herself totally out of where she was and
Yes, she
into
did.
A much better place nowadays. And it makes me happy.
And she's very cool with her meditative classes.
Yes,
and,
right.
and that's just a great example of two creative forces that came together, and Hollywood had its influence, but you guys were able to sort of come full circle, it sounds like.
We did indeed, and she is and remains, I think, one of the finest, most intuitive, certainly most spontaneous actresses that I ever worked with, and it continues. I mean, when I was doing the commentary of a couple of the episodes that I directed on the Bionic Woman on the DVD, I found myself getting choked up all over again at several of her performances, and
Wow.
I remember very clearly standing beside the camera on the set when we were doing doing it, and where we would just choke each other up all the time.
Yeah.
It was one of the most satisfying artistic experiences I ever had, and I was sorry to see it end at the time the way that it did. But now, as you say, it's come full circle, and everybody's happy.
That's the beauty of it. And V will come full circle. I know it, and I can't wait to talk to you again with the latest chapter on that saga, too. Well, Kenny, thank you again so much. You're so generous, and I totally know why the audience connected with your material then and still does. And it's been my pleasure to be able to go through this journey with you.
Oh, the pleasure has been mine, Chris. Anytime, and stay in touch.
My deepest gratitude again, Kenny. I thank you, Angelina Jolie's leg thanks you, and my bionic butt thanks you for infusing our imaginations during our childhood and into our adulthood with great human themes that really enabled us to see the similarities in our differences and how to turn our weaknesses into our strengths. You have impressed many minds, and we look forward to you impressing us further. So stay in touch with us, Kenny. From alien visitors descending on our planet to killer bees descending on our heads, Kenneth Johnson isn't the only one who can dream up some crazy, cool fantasy. Yep, it's time for our dream segment. And in this installment, our dreamweaver Yvonne Reba tells us about one of her clients' recent dreams where she was attacked by killer bees that stung her in her face, in her lips. Pretty interesting symbolism happening here. And like with Kenny's storytelling, some pretty interesting thematic material. As Yvonne will tell us, when themes or events from our past revisit us in our dreams, this often signals something similar happening or about to happen in our waking life. And really, these dreams are giving us the opportunity to get things right a second or a third or a fourth time. Much like Kenny's V feature will do with all of those V sequels that he really wasn't involved in. So now let's sit back and dream a little dream with Yvonne Reba. Check out her website at YvonneReba.com. That's YvonneRyba.com. And now let's join her. And hello again, Yvonne.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm great. How is the dream world and the waking world treating you?
The dream world is very populated, as a matter of fact, with people all over the place sending me dreams.
I bet.
So, yeah, it's good. Very good.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Well, you got another good one for us this week.
Yes, I did. And I know the dreamer. She comes from a large family of mostly daughters, and I know pretty much all of them. And they're a great bunch of people. And she sent me this dream, and she changed the way that she'd been doing things. She's a teacher, and she had been doing special education, and it had really stressed her out. So she'd had, her mother had had some operation, her sister was sick, there was lots of things going on, so she was very stressed out. And then she changed from teaching special ed to regular teaching, and she loves it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she does. She loves it. And she said last year she was very angry a lot of the time because of things happening in her life. And this year she loves the students, the children. She is getting on very well with that. But then she had this dream, and she kind of couldn't figure out what it was about. So that's the one I decided I would tell you.
Yeah.
And it also, by the way, comes around about an anniversary of a dear friend of theirs who died last year.
Oh.
So that might have been a kind of a trigger as well.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to dread those anniversaries of, especially the first year of someone dying. Okay, so I'll read the dream. In between, I will give you some of my ideas of what this is about.
Perfect.
Okay. I was visiting the church I attended when I was 19 years old. In the dream, I was feeling anxious about visiting the church since I left when I was around 22 because I did not agree with the pastor. And I looked at that and said, well, that's an old belief system that you had when you were younger. Okay, you were 19 and you went to church, and you had this belief system, which apparently she had some problems with, and she disagreed with the pastor and she left. So I felt that said, you're thinking about this and you don't feel that the people at that point in your life were credible or truthful.
Right.
Your subconscious is bringing up some details from the past which are troubling you in the present. Right, because I think she'd picked this. To me, it was like something's going on now that reflects or seems very similar to this other time.
Right.
And what is it?
We often repeat those themes and situations in our life until we kind of get it right, I guess.
That's right, yeah. And your subconscious will go back into your filing cabinets of all the stuff that ever happened to you, and it doesn't mind where it picks it from, right? So I think she's about 40 now, and so it went straight back to when she was 19.
Yeah,
and took this time out and said, this is just the same kind of situation. Okay, now the next part, she said, her dream, my sister Linda had been visiting the church and felt very comfortable with it, which, she said, is weird, since Linda never attended this church in real life. And that was a puzzle to her. So I said, well, Linda is older than you, isn't she? She's the older sister of all 4 girls. And her thoughts are different from yours in the dream. And she also, this is what I think, it wasn't Linda that she was seeing, it was an older part of herself. Especially because Linda never went to this church. It couldn't be her reflecting back what happened. She never went there in the first place. But my dreamer was looking at the older version of herself. And so she picked Linda.
Older as in 20 years ago, or older as in chronologically older and wiser?
Older and wiser now.
Oh, I see.
Her dream is saying, you're not 19 anymore, or 22. Right? We've learned a lot.
Right.
You're
God, yes.
older and wiser. And she looked at Linda, who they all look upon Linda as the older and wiser sister anyway. All three of them, they all have a lot of fun together, but Linda is a little bit more, I wouldn't say sedate, but she's definitely someone that they look up to as knowing more, let's put it that way. Yeah. You always do that with your older sister.
Oh, yes, brother. Usually.
Well, yeah. Okay, so the next part of the dream. Okay, so here we are at this old church that used to go to, and she's walking outside of the church when she's attacked by killer bees.
Oh, no, not killer bees.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Killer bee, yeah. They swarmed me, covering my body. The killer bees were stuck in my face, arms, neck, lips, head, and so on. I was able to get away, and I took all of the bees off me. The bees fell to the ground and died instantly. I spent some time taking stingers out of my skin, especially my face and lips, which is also an interesting piece, that little bit at the end there. Okay, so we've got these nasty stinging bugs, okay, and remember we've talked about this before, insects, because we use the word bugs for them, and we also use the word bug to say something's irritating us, getting under our skin. You know, it's a play on words, and the subconscious loves to do this. Loves to take something and play on the words and meaning. So here we've got, you've been stung, and where have you been stung? And your face a lot of the time, and the lips as well.
The lips.
Specifically mentioned the lips. So to me, that was stinging remarks. Okay?
Right.
Stinging remarks. Something had been said to her in which she felt stung. Okay?
Right on the kisser.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the head is where, let's face it, where we do our thinking.
Right.
So I had said to her, well, this sounds to me like a lot of gossip and nasty criticism. And was this at the church that you mentioned? I mean, I wanted to know, because I didn't know this. I wanted to know, is that what happened at the church? Did you have criticism with a lot of gossip and so on? The bee stings all over you, and mostly your upper body, okay, and especially the lips, suggests that you feel very strongly about somebody doing the same kind of thing to you now. And in the face and lips, yes, the face and lips look like facing somebody or something, and lips, the stinging remarks. This could be a bitter memory coming back, and it may not be about you, but you felt it then, and perhaps now.
I see.
And I said to her, if this is comparing events from 2 stages in your life, the fact that the bees died when pulled off means you killed the nastiness. You being angry a lot, you said last year, could also refer to the stings, but stings and anger do tend to go together. And I wasn't sure that all of this was just about her and the pastor. I think the whole family left that church, and I seem to remember something about that in a conversation, that she also felt the criticism was at other people in her family. And you know how you feel about somebody criticizing your mom or your sister or your father or whoever.
Say whatever you want to about me, but don't talk about my family.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really upset.
Oh,
and I
yeah.
felt like there was some of that here, right? Next part of the dream. I spent some time at the church and then walked back outside with Valerie's little girl, Sophia. Now, Valerie is her younger sister, and that's her little daughter. And I heard the killer bees coming. My first instinct was to protect all of her older sister's kids and her younger sister's little girl from the killer bees. I remember thinking to myself, why is Valerie's little girl walking around when she's just an infant? Which is not true, since Sophia is 15 months. But, again, the children in the dream are parts of her. This is what I told her. Still growing into maturity. But you are protecting yourself against these bees, which could also be a wordplay on bees.
Like the bee word, perhaps?
Yes, exactly.
Some real-life bees have stung me.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and that's what, you know, there's several words with bees, starting with bees, and both of them, that I can think of, would fit this.
Yes.
So, and I said, you also show that you want to make sure your children are not subjected to the same nastiness that you had to put up with. There's a protectiveness coming through here. That was my feeling about it, right? Now, it helps to know them a bit, but even so, I'd have thought that anyway. The next part of the dream. The bees swarmed me again. They stung me everywhere. I could feel them hanging on my lips and my cheeks. Sophia and the kids got a couple of stings, but they were fine, since their mothers grabbed them and took them to safety. I remember pulling the bees off me again, and they fell to the ground dead. But this time, the stingers were still in me. My sisters and my mom said I needed to get to the hospital, because people can die from killer bees, and I was already attacked twice. I laid on the back seat of the car while my family drove me to the hospital, and I continued to pull out stingers from my lips and face, and then I woke up.
Yikes.
Yes, right. So we got a dream here where somebody's been attacked. Definitely. I mean, more than once.
Yes.
It reminds them of a previous time, and she has to go to the hospital, okay? Mm-hmm. So this is what I told her. Hospitals are healing places. Your mom and sisters tell you to go there. Well, they're your support group. But in the dream, they're also facets of you, because everything in a dream is about you. It's always a facet of you. Of course, it can be two things. Dreams are like onions with many skins. So you have to peel them back. And that's why sometimes they're so complicated. But her support group are loving, compassionate, and they're telling you to go and heal. Of course, this is a spiritual thing they're telling you to do. So the hospital is a church or spiritual group which will help you let go of the feelings which are still hurting you. That's what they're suggesting. Obviously, she's not going to a hospital because she's not stung, but she does need some kind of help or therapy to get through what is happening.
The emotional sting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, here I wrote, your inner self is helping you to move forward and grow in this way. You are moving into a better place, as you wrote at the start of this email. She did tell me she loved her teaching job and so on. You feel better with the change, but there is something here which needs to be released. But feel good about yourself, because if you're criticizing yourself right now, stop it. She's a good person. And some of this could be dealing with some health issues as well.
I see.
Now, she wrote back to me when she got this, her feedback. Okay, because, I mean, I didn't know if I was on the ball or not.
Right.
And she's very busy. Obviously, she's got 4 little boys and teachers, and her husband works and so on, and they're all a big family that get together. Anyway, she said, I read the interpretation and I shared it with my sisters. I hope you don't mind. Well, of course I wouldn't. I thought it was very insightful. I really think it relates back to trust issues with the church in the past, and the feelings I'm having now with many of my co-workers. Right? So there is something going on here right now. She said, I feel there is deception there, and I'm very careful on who to trust. In fact, I only trust one person at work, and she's away on maternity leave at the moment, so I'm alone. There's a lot of backstabbing and negativity among other people on my campus.
Wow.
And since I've already been through this in my past, I tend to isolate myself and enjoy my own company and my students.
Yes.
It does often feel like my old church. I also sometimes feel unappreciated at work when I volunteer and help so many teachers out. I felt like this at my old church as well, and I found myself wanting to leave. Your interpretation brought up a lot of feelings and memories from the past that I had forgotten.
Wow.
Thank you so much for everything, and so on and so on.
She may have forgotten them consciously, but her subconscious mind did not.
No.
And is reminding her.
Yes, and it's saying we can get through this, and we can deal with it, but we'll need some support. And the inner being, spirit is there within each one of us to help. It doesn't matter what your belief system. That's the whole purpose of having this spiritual core that we strengthen with everything we do, at least we hope we do. And you can only strengthen it with good things. By persevering, by putting out there the love, compassion, caring, generosity, whatever it is you can. It does not mean you have to be a doormat.
Right.
You are accountable for what you do, but so is everybody else, and you can't let people wet their feet all over you. I'm a full believer in that one.
Yes.
There's a big difference between being compassionate and letting somebody get away with things that harm other people.
There's that, and then like the flip side, you had mentioned the trust issues. A good friend of mine, whom I used to trust a lot, would always say to me, trust nobody but yourself, because she had been burned a few times and stung, and ultimately I got stung by her. And one of the things I realized is if you're a person that can't trust anybody, guess what? You can't be trusted either. So you don't want to go too far off in that direction either.
Exactly. That is the law of attraction.
Yeah,
yes. What you put out, you get back.
Yes.
So if they don't trust anybody, they're going to have trust issues, but yes, you can't trust them.
Yeah.
That is so true. Now, my late husband once had a really difficult time, like you did, and I think I know we've talked before about that issue that you mentioned. He had a similar thing where a great friend really betrayed him, in business too. So it was not just he lost a friend, but he lost a lot of money because this friend was very deceitful.
Wow.
And he was so shocked and hurt by it, and he was a good businessman, but he had a history with this fella. And he said to me, and he was going through it in his head, and he said, does this mean I haven't got to trust anybody? Have I got to go through my whole life thinking that somebody's going to take me down? I just have to stop all trust. And he waited for about 5 seconds while he thought about it, and then he thought, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to live like that.
No.
If I get taken, I get taken, but I'm not going to live like that. That's not going to make me happy. And he was perfectly right.
Because I'm sure he knew from talking to you that he would just be attracting that outcome ultimately if he dwelled on it. So it's kind of a fine dance of acknowledging the issues that you've dealt with in the past, not letting them dictate your present, but learning from them. And so if this comes up in your dreams in a recurring sort of retro way, see what it's going on in your current life where you can sort of learn the lesson and not repeat history but learn from it.
That's exactly what it's all about.
Yeah.
I was just preparing a talk today on the law of attraction, as a matter of fact. And in the talk, as I'm going through it, I'm thinking that this whole thing is what we attract to it.
Yes.
And just as you've said, we can't stop. Everything is constantly creating around us. We're creating with our thoughts. So if we put it out there, we will get what we want. And that's the spiritual core within us, the spirit within us that never dies. That is also guiding us, It knows what's right and wrong, and it helps us in the dream world.
Yes.
Especially because that's the place where the barriers are down.
It's all so fascinating.
It is, Chris.
So our dreams can sometimes represent our older, wiser selves that are trying to give us a pep talk, trying to steer us in the right direction. And so if we have this weird dream from the past with killer bees, maybe we should dissect it a little bit and see what maybe thematically it means.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah. And when she pulled them out, they dropped dead on the ground, you see. Once she took them out of her thoughts, out of her head, out of her face, right? Once she took it out and she let it go, it was dead.
There you go.
You see, and that's what we have to do. We have to take that horrible, despairing thought, aggravating thought, angry thought, whatever it is, and it's okay for it to pass through. I mean, we can't stop all our feelings.
Right.
But we haven't got to dwell there. We have to just let it flow straight through, and we don't resist it. Don't start saying, bring it back and let me think about that again.
Let it flow.
I mean, I know people who do that, and it just kills them eventually,
Yeah, things have to be expressed, and even if they're just expressed mentally, and then we sort of acknowledge them and move on.
Yes.
It can't all just stay there and, push back in our mind. It will come back up and repeat itself one way or another in our lives. alive.
Well, the subconscious won't let you get away with it.
No.
It will bring it back, and you will get recurring dreams on those things as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you don't pay attention, it'll start repeating.
And maybe next time I have a recurring dream I'd like to ask you about, so I'm looking forward to getting your insights into this kind of crazy recurring thing. So we'll chat again in April.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chris.
Reimagine That with Chris Mann is brought to you by Retroality TV. Copyright 2012 by Chris Mann. You can find us at retroality.tv and at reimaginethat.libsyn.com. Tweet us at Retroality TV or join us on Facebook at facebook.com/retroalitytv. And don't forget to check out our TV channel at youtube.com/retroalitytv. And let's remember to only judge individuals based on their own merits and attributes. In other words, interplanetary aliens shouldn't automatically be treated as second-class citizens. Unless you actually see them scarfing down small defenseless rodents in one bite.